Okay, so you know how you wouldn't think twice about spending like $15 for just one glass of wine?
Yeah,
But then you have tea, which has literally centuries of history and tons of variety and all these amazing health benefits.
right.
And it's kind of seen as this like cheap alternative.
Exactly.
So why is that? Well, today we are going on a deep dive to uncover this really interesting argument about why tea really deserves more respect.
More respect, more attention, more value, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And you shared this really fascinating piece with me. It's almost like this modern parable that makes this really strong case for elevating how we think about the value of tea.
It's really creative, too. It's structured like a dialogue.
Yeah, it's so cool. So it's called Redefining Worth,
Oh, yeah.
Elevating Tea to Wine's Level, and it's by Susie Badaracco from Culinary Tides, Inc. And what I love about it is how it's set up. It's like tea and wine are these characters meeting in this really cool cafe that kind of blends both of their worlds.
Yeah, a hybrid space.
Yes, exactly. And it's kind of written like a play, which I thought was a really fun way to bring up this whole question of worth and value.
It really is. And it really highlights this question we're exploring in this deep dive for you.
Mm.
Why is one seen as so much more valuable than the other? I mean, they're both beverages. What makes us perceive one as so much higher?
Right.
So that's exactly what we are going to explore. We want to get into the arguments for recognizing tea's true worth and really compare and contrast these two beverages.
Right. And right away, you see this contrast between tea and wine and how they talk about themselves and their value. Wine kind of swaggers in with this confidence about being valued, glass by glass, bottle by bottle.
It's very sure of itself.
Right. It's very secure in its place in the world. And then there's tea, which kind of feels like the afterthought.
Yeah, it's like the backup dancer, not the star of the show.
Right, exactly. And even tea kind of admits to underselling itself.
Right. It's almost like it's internalized this lower value perception.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting that wine acknowledges that it wasn't always on this pedestal.
Yeah, it talks about its own journey.
Right, like it wasn't always this revered beverage.
Exactly. It mentions things like terroir, which is essentially the soil and the climate and all these environmental factors that give wine its specific character.
Like its fingerprint.
Right. And aging, of course, and this feeling of exclusivity all played a role in building up its reputation and how it's seen today.
And this is where tea has its light bulb moment.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, you have all this respect and value because of these things, but what about me? Why not me?
It's a big question. Why not me?
Right. And it's like this turning point in the conversation because it's like, okay, let's really examine this.
Yeah.
So the conversation naturally moves into the health and wellness aspect of both.
Of course, because in today's world especially, I mean,
Right.
wellness is huge.
It's everything. So wine talks about bringing this warmth, boldness, and celebration to the table. It even mentions the whole, a glass of red wine a day is good for the heart.
Heart healthy aspect.
Yeah.
In moderation.
In moderation, of course.
Always in moderation.
Right. And tea is like, hold on a second. Look at my benefits. I have antioxidants. I'm anti-inflammatory. I can bring this sense of calm. I'm adaptogenic, which means I can help you deal with stress.
Right.
And I'm non-intoxicating.
Huge.
Right. I love how T put it in the story. I'm heart healthy without a warning label.
So true. You can have me any time of day.
Exactly. It doesn't come with those caveats.
Right. And tea even goes beyond those key benefits and talks about how it can even help with your digestion.
Yeah, like lower your cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone, help you sleep better, and even give you healthier skin.
It's a whole package. It's like tea is saying, I'm not just a drink.
Right.
I can actually help you with your overall wellness routine.
And this is where I thought T made a really interesting point.
Tell me about it.
You can sit me at 10 a.m. and not get fired.
Oh my gosh, yes. That's
Right.
gold. Pure gold. It's so true.
I mean, you're not going to be having a glass of wine at 10 a.m. before a big meeting.
Probably not a good idea.
Right. But tea is totally acceptable.
Exactly. It highlights this huge difference in how we perceive and consume these two beverages, and then they move on to sustainability.
Which is obviously a huge topic these days.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And wine really talks about its terroir-driven and seasonal nature.
Like, it has to be the right place, the right time,
Exactly.
the right everything to make it special.
Right. But then tea comes in, and it's like, yeah, that's all well and good, but have you heard about my amazing efficiency?
Because it's like all these different kinds of tea all come from the same plant.
Right.
Green tea, black tea, white tea, oolong, yellow tea, pura. They all come from Camellia
And
sinensis.
it's such a mind-blowing fact.
It's kind of wild when you think about it.
It really is. It
Yeah.
uses this really clever analogy in the story. It says there's like one vine producing Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Syrah all at the same time.
Right, which is impossible in the wine world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But for tea, it's like, that's just my thing.
It's how I roll.
It's essentially that little tea plant in your cupboard
Yeah.
has this massive potential for different flavor profiles. It's like a whole wine region in one plant.
It's pretty incredible. And then tea talks about how sustainable it is.
Right, how it can be grown in biodiverse ecosystems. It's often hand-harvested, doesn't need that much processing or water.
Yeah.
And fermentation is only for certain types, like pu'er.
Right, so it's like this humble but super efficient plant.
Exactly. And it's almost like wine is kind of taken aback by this. It's like, wow, I never really thought about it that way.
And then, of course, they get into the flavor profiles and the artistry involved in both. Wine talks about its well-established evaluation criteria. You know, you have the body, the nose, the mouthfeel, the finish, all those fancy words.
Yeah, the tasting notes.
Right. But tea is ready to play that game, too. It's like, oh, you think you're the only one with complexity? Well, check out my range of flavors.
And it's really impressive.
Right. I mean, you have the green teas, which are bright and grassy.
Right.
You have oolongs, which have floral and stone fruit notes. Black teas, which are bold and malty.
And don't forget white tea.
Oh, yeah. White tea, which is delicate and sweet. And then you have yellow tea, which is so rare.
Very rare.
And has these buttery notes.
It's like drinking liquid gold.
Right. And then pu'er, which is earthy, fermented, and aged.
And that's where the parallel with wine is really cool, because some pure teas can be aged for decades.
Like fine wines.
Exactly.
And then tea brings up infused teas like jasmine tea, where the beautiful aroma isn't chemically added.
Very
It's
good.
naturally absorbed by the tea leaves.
So poetic.
Right. And wine is kind of chuckling at this point, like, wow, okay, I see you.
Like some newfound respect.
Exactly. And from there, they start talking about their cultural range and global presence.
Which is another huge differentiator.
Right. So wine is like, I'm the toast of the West.
Like, I'm very ingrained in Western traditions.
Right. Very European.
Exactly.
And tea is like, well, I'm the soul of the East.
And that's where it really gets into the different setting.
Right. It's in Tibetan monasteries, Moroccan homes, Japanese tea ceremonies, Indian street corners. It's everywhere.
Right. It paints this really vivid picture of its cultural roots and how widespread it is across Asia.
It's such a contrast to wine, which talks about sommeliers and vineyards.
Yeah, very different vibes.
Right. And tea is talking about monks and medicinal uses.
Centuries of tradition.
Exactly. But tea isn't just stuck in the past. It's very much a part of the modern world.
Of course.
Like it mentions matcha, which is so popular now, and bubble tea, which is this huge craze, and all these ready-to-drink tea tonics and even tea cocktails.
Right. Tea has gone global in a big way.
Exactly. And this leads them to what tea calls the elephant in the room, which is the price problem.
Right. This is the core issue.
Because there's this almost automatic assumption that tea should be cheap.
Like $3 a cup.
Yeah, which is crazy when you think about it because it has all these health benefits.
Way more than wine, often.
Right.
And yet, people are happy to spend $16 or more on a glass of wine.
It's like we've decided that just because tea is accessible, it can't be valuable.
Exactly. And tea brings up this great point about how they're often served in similar vessels.
Yeah, like you have your wine glass and you have your teacup. They're not that different.
Right.
And then there's the irony of the preparation. Wine pretty much comes ready to go, but tea requires precision. You have to get the water temperature right, the steeping time right, the amount of tea right.
But somehow it's seen as basic compared to wine, which is considered refined.
Right.
It's fascinating.
And to really illustrate this price disparity, tea does this hypothetical cost comparison. It says that if it was priced like wine, a tin of loose leaf tea could cost $90.
$90.
Yeah. And people are used to paying like $15 or $20 for a tin that makes 30 cups of tea.
So there's this huge gap.
Right. And tea sums it up perfectly when it says, people pay for the story, the exclusivity of the ritual.
And tea has all of those things.
It does. It just hasn't been telling its story well enough.
Right. So tea needs to get better at marketing itself, basically.
Exactly. And it goes on to talk about how versatile and innovator it is. It's not just a hot drink anymore.
Oh, definitely not. I mean, you have iced tea, sparkling tea. You see it in mocktails and these fancy non-alcoholic Aperitifs.
Right. And kombucha is basically tea.
Yeah, fermented tea.
Right. And you see it in mixology and even in food recipes.
And of course, all the ready-to-drink teas you can find in cans now.
It's everywhere.
It really is.
And tea makes this great point that it can bridge the gap between alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages in a way that wine just can't.
Yeah, because wine is inherently alcoholic.
Right. And it's crazy how much tea is consumed globally. Like 60% of the world drinks tea every day.
It's a huge number.
It's mind-blowing.
So it really makes you think,
Yeah.
where does tea fit in your life? And do you give it the credit it deserves?
Right. Are you undervaluing those tea moments?
And tea makes this interesting point that it's rarely the main event.
Yeah, like it's often the sidekick.
Right. But it's like this conversation is the start of a shift.
Right.
It's like a change in how we think about tea.
Exactly. And tea calls for this movement away from the sidekick mentality. It's like we need to embrace the luxury of tea.
Yeah, showcase those amazing origin stories.
Right. Talk up the different varieties and the craftsmanship involved and charge accordingly.
Right. The pricing should reflect the ritual, the culture, the experience.
Exactly. It's more than just a $2 drink.
Right. And tea beautifully connects itself to these really valuable experiences.
Which are like,
Ceremony,
okay.
quiet, connection, introspection, presence, restoration. It's like tea is saying, I can give you all these things.
Right.
And that's priceless.
So it's more than just a drink. It's an experience.
Exactly.
And their conversation ends on this really powerful note. It's like tea is saying, look, I'm not the underdog here. I'm an underestimated hero.
Right. It has its own unique complexity and this deep cultural significance.
Exactly. And it doesn't need to be like wine. It just needs to step into its own worth.
And own it.
Right. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it really makes you think, what does it actually mean to price something with so much value?
Especially something that has centuries of culture and craftsmanship behind it.
And all those amazing health benefits.
Right. So the next time you're having a cup of tea, really take a moment to think about all that's going into that cup.
Think about its history, its journey, and all the people who made it possible.
Yeah, and maybe even think about how much you're willing to pay for that experience.
Yeah, maybe it's worth more than you think.
Maybe yes.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.